Third?
Yeah. Behind?
No, that's for you right there.
Shit, that's me. I'm taking it
Folks, we're
off.
going to open things up here today with a special guest who's been around for a few of these drafts. And Gil's going to give us some opening remarks and talk about Cowboys' first draft and then the Cowboys' next draft. And then he's going to throw it to Jerry and we'll get started. And then as soon as we complete this press conference, we're going to all head across the street for a special presentation that we do for members of the Ring of Honor. And Gil's the first one who's gone into the Ring of Honor since we've been at the Star. So, and we've got about a 45-minute window with the sun shining, so we're not going to waste a whole lot of time.
Well, let me start off by telling you about the first Cowboy draft ever. And we did not have a draft in 1960 because we didn't have a franchise until February of 1960. So our first draft took place in Philadelphia at the Warwick Hotel on the 27th of December. And what happened is on the 26th of December, they had the NFC Championship game, or our championship game, NFL at that time, between Philadelphia and Green Bay. And we arrived, Tex and myself, Coach Landry didn't come to the draft. We arrived on the night of Christmas Eve, with one of these big steamer trucks, trunks full of books. Is what we did, and we were the only one. The room that we were in was just a little bigger than this room right here, and we had 13 teams at the time, or 14 teams at the time, because Minnesota was coming in, and they were a participant in the first draft, is what it is. And so we didn't have a first-round pick, and what we did is made a trade. We gave up our first pick the following year, and a guy named Paul Dixon, who was our starting tackle, to Washington to get the 16th pick in the first round, which enabled us to draft Bob Lilly. And in drafting Lilly, let me just digress for just a minute. At that first draft, there were 6 members of the press, no one from Dallas, but there were 6 members of the press. This year at the draft, there'll be credentialed already over 2,000 people. For this year's draft. So it's grown just a little bit. Like I said, it wasn't much bigger than this room, and we all had a telephone and on our desk, and Roselle had a little black chalkboard that he wrote the team's pick at the time. So it was so interesting is what it was. I think that the thing that and we had in essence, we had a terrible draft the first year. We had a good draft if it would have worked out for us. Tex was convinced that the AFL would not be a factor very long. And so we drafted 3 guys that we knew were already signed, or 2 of them that were already signed. On our second pick, we took E.J. Holub, and we were in a bind there because of the fact that we had asked E.J. to sign with the Los Angeles Rams, who were going to draft him, and then when they found out that he wouldn't sign with them, we picked him on the second round, and he subsequently signed with the Dallas Texans. But we had 2 choices that we later picked. One is in the Hall of Fame, Billy Shaw, who we knew had already signed with Buffalo, but we drafted him in hopes that someday he might be available to us. And then we drafted a guy named Stu Barber, who was a all-time AFL player that we thought might be available to us at some time. And so I think from that little description, you can see how this draft is growing. It's just unbelievable. And let me just say one thing in closing is this. I know a lot of people criticize what the Cowboys have done. And believe me, they have drafted well. It's hard to draft well today because everybody does such a good job. There's so many people out there working. And we used to get, we sometimes drafted I think Herb Scott was like our 50th ranked player. We drafted him in the 13th round because we would have people coming in there with Street and Smith football magazines, the Billings Gazette, to find out who were all the Midlands team, and people not even know. We had one guy drafted 3 different times before he was eligible, so it was a circus, really, is what it was. And now, on Monday, the April 30th, people will be already starting on 2020 draft.
You want me to? Okay, I'll go ahead and comment. One of the things that I've got a couple of questions for Gil. Holub, was that his first year?
Yeah.
Out, or were you drafting him in his junior year or drafting him early?
No. We didn't do it in those days. The first time he drafted anybody early was a guy named Rich Kreitling from Illinois, a wide receiver, I don't know, 1965 or something like that. But everybody else was a 4-year player, at least a 4-year player. Now, you could draft a player. You could draft a player that had been 4 years in school. As an example, the Rams drafted a guy named Sam Williams from Michigan State, who never even played a down, but he went to Michigan State as a freshman, went into the service. He later became a all-pro player. But Holub was a true 4-year player. And what happened with Holub is it was a case of pride, because we made this decision to take Lilly over Holub, and both of them turned out to be pretty good players.
Holub almost ruined it for me in terms of ever playing college football. They invited the potential scholarship players to sit on the sideline when Texas Tech played the Razorbacks in Little Rock. And you could give 60 scholarships, so it looked like a sizable high school graduating class to be a member of that distinguished group. But it was a lot of us, but we were sitting there about 2 rows back here from the sideline. And Arkansas, Texas Tech, that E.J. Holub, that rascal came running over. He's playing both sides of the ball in, and he made a play. And I thought, you really are thinking that you might get on the field with somebody like that in about a year and a half or so down the road? He almost made me not go. It was that important to look at there.
Well, he was pretty good. He played a long time.
He played a long time, didn't he, for sure. Now, first of all, Gil, it is a treat. I know the room shares with me. We could listen to this all day long. The main reason Gil is up here is that's about all you're going to learn about what we're doing in this year's draft. Or our plans for this year's draft. But apart from that, great to have you here. And we're going to be open to any questions that you might have.
Jerry, can I just say one last thing? Now, everybody reads about Russell Wilson's contract and so forth. Tex was known to have a few Cutty Sarks before he went to bed at night. And so about, I don't know, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, I called Tex from California, and I said, Tex, we just signed our first choice. And Tex's words were, how much did we pay? And I said, well, you have to understand. He said, no, just how much did we pay? And I said, no, I want to tell you. We paid $12,000 for contract with a $4,000 signing bonus. And his words to me, he says, oh my gosh, if I let you spend money like that, we'll be out of business before we start. So it's changed just a little bit.
I'd say.
Well, I might say this in response to that. With what's been going on lately with football, we've talking about the AFL at that time, and we're talking about some of our experiences we've been seeing in pro football, which is about financial. It's always been about the money. It's always been about it. It was about the money with the AFL, and there's no joy in Mudville unless there's enough juice to work the draft and have the scouting meetings to make them go there. And all you got to do is get without it a few days, and you see what it might be like.
Well, Jerry, one last thing. In those days, we used to pay on Tuesday. And the reason that we paid on Tuesday rather than on Monday, we want to make sure the check cleared from the visiting team that you got, hopefully, when you left after playing there.
Well, they should have at least by then. Let's see, I was about out of school. I had written a book on kiting checks, and so I was the world champion. By the way, that would be illegal. I just want you to know that. But they had a guy sitting back home that they could have conferred about how to keep a payroll going without any money for a long time.
Questions?
Okay.
Jerry and Stephen, without a first-round pick in this draft, can you talk, does that impact the rest of the draft in that it makes it more likely or unlikely that you would move around in the second, third, fourth rounds?
Go ahead.
No, I don't think so. I think if, as you've heard me say many times, those things come your way almost just like that, and you've got to be ready to go. When we drafted Claiborne, we were no more thinking when we walked in there that we would be trading and be drafting Claiborne where we drafted him. As a matter of fact, we went past Claiborne pretty fast in the evaluation process just simply because we didn't think he was there. So at least he reminded us in here today we better really, some of these guys that we think are gone in the first round, we better really be evaluating we are. But I'd say it's you couldn't answer that because you never know when we might have the circumstances. There's some players that can be difference makers up there that you might consider it, but from my perspective, sitting here without that one, I don't know about you, I'm not interested in trying to just stack up these one-less draft days. They're no fun.
So if you move up, it'd be most likely in the second round, I move back up.
Well, again, you'd have to go where you are and what the circumstances are. You can't ever tell. Somebody might call and offer you the one someplace for something you think was worth it in terms of next year.
Jerry, if you permit me, I'd like to just add one thing. let me, and this is the end of me. let me tell you a little bit about this draft. This draft has about 15 to 17 players that you can bet on are going to go in the first round. There's no question they're going to go on in the first round. But then you're going to find a whole bunch of players from about 17 to 70 that all look alike. And that 70th player could be drafted early or not drafted until 70. So it's an interesting draft, and it's a draft that really benefits the Cowboys or teams that do their homework because you can really work out well. And if you're looking for a safety, there's more safeties in this draft of quality than I've ever seen in my life. And if you need a center, there's a lot of centers in this draft also.
Sure is.
So y'all looking for safety? We brought him out the business.
I told you, we've got him sitting up here for a reason. Okay.
But to follow up, is there a cluster, when you're finding, as you're stacking your board, are you finding a cluster of players though, throughout the position? Are you finding it as deep in certain positions?
I think there's going to be players there for us that, I think really good football players that'll be there. And, at positions that you might kind of hope for. At the same time, as I've said time and time again, what we try to do in free agency is get it to where we don't feel the pressure to take at certain positions. If something shows up there at our pick in the second, if we haven't moved, that we can take that player if it's a first-round caliber player, but not necessarily at a position that we've that we've looked at harder than others in terms of where we kind of hope a good player might show up, then we can make that move.
Steven, you joked with us at the Combine that when the Raiders are on the clock, you're going to be looking at Amari Cooper highlights. As you guys have gone through that process, is there any receiver that compares to what Amari did when he was coming out? And what have you used your Amari report from then to stack him up versus the receiver?
Yeah, I don't think there's any buyer's remorse there. I think we're really pleased we made that move. As Jerry said, it's painful to go through a draft without a number one pick. And we had kind of looked at each other before and said we'd never do that again. But, certainly after we've gone through the receivers and looked at that, I think we're very happy with where we've ended up in terms of what we could get, at our pick in terms of a receiver, or for that matter, any other player in terms of what we've ended up with Amari.
Going back to the safety position real quick, how do you think that your safety position on your roster is right now, and then how do you think it stacks up with this class?
I think you can always improve any position. Obviously, if you look at the resources that we have there, whether it be money or quality of pick, then, it's probably got the least amount of resources that have been put toward any position on our team is the safety position. I mean, Xavier was a later pick. Heath was a later pick. Kayvon was a later pick. Aloka, we got him in free agency, but I wouldn't say we broke the bank bringing him to Dallas. So, we'll certainly, if a really good safety showed up that we think can improve us at some point in the draft, then, that could certainly upgrade us in terms of that particular position.
Jason, in your scheme, are safeties interchangeable, or do you look at one as down safeties, back safeties? How do you view the position?
I think you want them to be versatile enough to be able to play down and also to play back. I think that gives you the best freedom to play the covers the way you want to play them. Typically on most teams, guys will have a strength. Some guys are considered more strong safeties, box players, and other guys are more suited. I think the better opportunities you have to defend really each week and be multiple in your defensive approach. I got a quick question for Gil. What were the traits that Bob Lilly had that were the defining traits that made you draft him?
Well, the traits were that he was a guy that was recruited as an example to show you the difference. He grew up in Pendleton. He didn't grow up. He played his last year of high school football in Pendleton, Oregon, and TCU recruited him with a penny postcard. But his traits were that we were the first team that ever timed anybody before we drafted him. And he ran like 4.57 or something for a 235-pound defensive lineman, and he had long arms, which was very important to us. And he was a very, very competitive player.
Did you know about the motor?
Well, we went back to watch number 53 play in high school in Pendleton, Oregon, and he had a motor then.
Yeah. That was a good pick.
Yeah, it was.
Yes, it was.
A lot of money, too.
Getting back to safety for a minute, is that a position that I guess I don't know if you have a philosophy about safety, but you said you haven't put a lot of capital toward the position on the roster, but in recent years you haven't really spent a lot of draft capital in the position, going back to Roy Williams, I think it was and Byron Jones, but since we're between Roy Williams and Byron Jones, those are the only two safeties drafted in the first 2 rounds. Going back to 2000, whatever, 3, 4 that was. Is that a philosophy?
Well, I think a playmaking safety, which can be few and far between in terms of, guys who actually make plays on the ball, who are very productive in terms of the tackling and that type of situation. I mean, they're rare, obviously. We've looked at playmaking safeties and hadn't been able to get deals done. If we see the right guy there at the right price, then if he does all the things, as Jason mentioned, versatility is a big part of it. But at the same time, if they have a unique skill to make plays back there, and we've certainly seen them in our league that make those. We had one here in Darren Woodson that was special. And Roy Williams certainly was special at what he did. If you find the right player at that position, then it certainly warrants not only a high pick, but it can warrant big contracts. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we're it's not a priority. But at the same time, you've got to find the guy, and those guys are rare. They can be hard to find. At the same time, you can find some really good safeties in this league, Xavier being an example, that can make some plays that maybe he's not the perfect size or maybe missing something, so he falls, and you end up with a productive player. So, I wouldn't say we're discounting the position, but I do think it's rare to find those safeties that, have those rare qualities that can not only make plays on the ball, but can also be, bring the physical part of the game in terms of the tackling.
Steven, y'all have a pretty obvious need at running back heading into this draft. You also obviously have an all-pro at that position. How do you weigh the value of that, of, needing to address the depth there while also, obviously having a capable running back in Zeke?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, you worry about, what you do if Zeke's not 100%. And certainly going he's rare. You want to get him as many touches as you can, but it's also a long season. And, we're going to obviously be looking, whether we get it done through the draft or whether we get it done in free agency. We're going to be looking to upgrade there in terms of what we have behind Zeke. Well, we have some young guys there, but, we could certainly see a situation where we could improve there.
Is that, I assume those are conversations that y'all have, or maybe it's elementary on my part to think this pick is too rich to draft a backup player, or do you not think about it that way?
I just think it depends on the player. I mean, if that's a first-round caliber player in our mind, then you have to take a look at it. It's relative to what, and it's certainly a rich pick. I mean, you hope you're drafting there in the second round a plug-in starter. I mean, that's what you hope to do. It doesn't always work out that way, but you're hoping to find a player there in the second round that can step in and make a big difference. And we all know if Zeke's healthy, there's not going to be a whole lot of touches going to that player. At the same time, you never know when you're going to need a player like that if Zeke were to miss a game. And, we've been fortunate with a player like Emmitt Smith who seemed to always be available. And Zeke's, barring an incident, obviously has been a guy who's very dependable, and we can count on him.
You look at, you bring it up, Emmett, and then you were talking about drafting running back. How do you think back to '95? We took Sherman Williams in the second round, a backup guy. When you have a running back that come into play here to some extent.
Yeah, there's real need, really need. And I asked Ernie before the draft, I said, how could we improve our offense the most? And he said, get us back up to Emmett, which follows the logic behind the importance of a backup when you've got a premier back like that for a lot of reasons. Insurance, or with just basically being resourceful with your great running back. But we also like to use that second pick. That's a place where those Sean Lees can pop up, or that's a place where those Randy Gregory's can come. Or that's a place where Flozell Adams is, and people like that come in that range. So there's a myriad, to ask the question, there's a myriad of considerations there that make that pick completely about 4, 5, 6, 7 different philosophies that you could tie into with that pick that we've done, and we'll have. I'm confident we'll have a decision as to whether or not to get a Jalen Smith type decision, or whether to sit there and try to get one that can immediately step in here and help us immediately. But again, that has everything to do with what they've done ahead of you there.
Jerry, you had said that y'all don't regret the trade for Amari Cooper at all, and but you said you don't like the idea of not having a first rounder, and y'all make it sound like y'all came to that realization at some point that trading those picks or being without them is a bad plan. At what point did you arrive at that? Okay,
and I think that I should clear that up. I want both. I want Amari and I want our first round pick. And I try to do that with a lot of my decisions. And I do a lot of dreaming. But seriously, I don't want to imply in any way I would do it tonight again to make that pick. We are that rewarded by our future here with Amari, and consequently, I want to be real clear there. But again, it's simply a foolish thought of, boy, I'd like to have been able to do that another way and still have that number one pick. But candidly, it makes anything that we're doing here very acceptable to reach over there and be thinking about the future of Amari Cooper and the Cowboys.
We did that one time with John Dutton also, when we thought we had a chance to get to the Super Bowl, and unfortunately the catch prevented us from getting there. But we gave up a first, and at the time you hate to do it, but it helped us greatly.
as the deadline approaches for that fifth-year option, for instance, on someone like Zeke, do you guys see yourselves doing that ahead of May 3rd?
I don't think that's, significant in terms of when we do it, as long as we get it done, that it'll get done. And I don't, I'm sure we'll send it in 2 or 3 days ahead of time just to make sure there's no problems. But obviously, we're going to do it.
Jerry, you talked about the Jalen and Sean and the risk, and Randy, risks you've taken in the second round. Why have you been willing to make those decisions? And now not having that first round pick, does that alter maybe that philosophy at all?
I think that you're operating without a net a little bit by not being able to have made with that first round, somebody that you hope gives you a significant contribution that first year. If you start going into that second pick with a real question mark as to this coming year's contribution, I think logic would dictate for me slowing down a little bit there. But again, it was the potential that you had in a Gregory, the potential that you had with the expectation of a Flozell dropping down there to you, or any number of others. So it's always, frankly, it's always about the gain and a little diminished thought about the price or the cost. And so, if you will, candidly always look to the positive. Amari is a perfect example of that, as opposed to the consequences of not having it. Scarlett O'Hara, as she looked at Rhett Butler, I'll worry about that tomorrow. Now there's...
Jason, do you feel that since you've been head coach, the team is going into this draft best positioned in terms of depth across the board at all the positions? And is that a culmination of how this franchise is drafted over the last 5-6 years?
Well, certainly what you want to do is you want to get to a point like Stephen described earlier where you don't have these tremendous needs on draft day. That's typically when you draft the worst players, because you see this blatant need, and unfortunately, consciously or subconsciously, sometimes that can impact the whole evaluation process. If you have a big hole at a spot, all of a sudden these tackles look like they're better than maybe they are. So I think we've done a really good job deciding what kind of team we want to have, communicating what that is, bringing the right kind of guys in to fulfill that, and it starts with the draft. And then to supplement that, if you do a good job in free agency, to minimize these blatant needs on your team, you can go in there and pick the best players. And I think if you reflect back on the last few years, when we've been in that situation, that's when we've drafted our best guys. And sometimes you say, oh, you're stacking up. You draft another offensive lineman. It turns out to be Zach Martin, right? One of the best players we have on our team. So if you can get yourself to that point, I think that's when you can really improve your team, not only for now, but for going forward. And that's always a pursuit of ours. We're never there. It's never completely like you want it, but I do think we've done a good job drafting and using free agency the right way to get us to that point.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the significant impact Will McClay has had on the draft process over the past few years?
I'll start. Will's fantastic. He's fantastic, does a great job. I think one of the best things we do is communicate in the organization, and Will does a great job not only leading that department, but communicating with ownership, with coaches, and kind of facilitating all of that to get everybody on the same page. And we probably draft our best when we have good consensus among everybody. We have lively discussion. You go back and forth as to why you like this player, why you don't like this player, why he fits, why he doesn't fit, and then you come to a conclusion together. And I think we've done a really good job of that, and I think Will's done a fantastic job leading that process.
I would echo what Jason says, and I think, one thing that's interesting, at some point you do just agree to disagree, and we try to avoid those players. Where if we can't get a consensus, you try to find a player that fits at that level where there is a consensus. And I think we've done a great job of that, and Will, I credit a lot, agree with Jason. He's just a tremendous consensus builder. He spends a ton of time, obviously, with his staff, He also spends a ton of time with our coaching staff, with each position coach, and then of course he's very intensely involved with Jerry and myself in terms of how he communicates. So, I think he's as good as they get.
I would add the point that he is so prepared, and he digs. He's done his homework. And again, we're having the joy of having Gil be a part of this thing, but who is the father of doing your homework and getting out in detail, and then bringing those facts to the table. And the good news is that that draft board, when you look at it there, you always hear about the draft board, and Gil, you're supposed to know the answer before you ask the question. I don't know the answer there. But did y'all ever depart from your draft board?
Yeah, we did one time. One year, we were supposed to draft Joe Montana. He was our choice. And Coach Landry said, I really like Montana. I've got 3 veteran quarterbacks. I don't think we can have 4 quarterbacks on our football team. So we passed on Joe Montana, and we took a tight end, the next guy on our board by the name of Doug Cosby. And played pretty good for us, but he wasn't Joe Montana.
No.
You've stuck with your board better than we've stuck with our board. Let's put it like that.
Stephen, when you look at the deals you guys have laid out on players and what is coming in the future, what is there added significance in drafting well in rounds 3 through 7 to make sure you have that middle class or bottom, that you can't pay everybody, that you have to submit, you have to have guys at the bottom filling in?
Absolutely. I mean, there's not a lot to add to that, Todd. I think you say it well. We have to be good all the way through the draft, and I know that's easier said than done. But especially as we start to get into this world of having some really high-priced players, well-deserved, albeit, but as we start to have these bigger contracts, then we are going to have these draft classes step up, because there's going to be situations where we can't sign them all, and we want to do everything we can to manage it. We think we've got a great plan in terms of how we're going to move forward to optimize this particular roster. We think it's a young roster that has the potential to win championships, but we have to manage it in a good way. As I said, I think we got a great plan, but part of that plan is to have young players come in here that can play and contribute. And we've been fortunate that we've done a good job of that over the past 4, 5, 6 years. But those young guys, and especially the later round guys who come in and aren't as highly paid as the higher picks, are ready to get paid when they come up too, so when they contribute. So it's very important that we have success there. Obviously, it's also very important that we have success, albeit we're not paying the big contracts, but some of these deals we do out here in free agency, 1-year deals, lesser type deals, that we have success with those guys as well. And we certainly feel good about the guys that we've signed and think they can step in and contribute. And we all know about the compensatory system. If you do sign guys to 1 year and then they have success here and they go out and they sign bigger contracts somewhere else, then that can mean significant compensatory picks for us, which in turn we have to, that has to translate into good young football players for us.
Stephen, how much do you take into account Chris Richard and the kind of players he likes to coach when you start looking at defensive backs here?
Oh, I think it's it's what Jason referred to. I mean, Will does a great job, I think, of interacting with our staff, with Jason, with his staff, with Chris Richard, with Rod Marinelli, with Kellen Moore, with Mark Colombo, in terms of the type of football player that they need to have success in those systems. And so it's critical that we visit. And there's no question we're looking at some different players than we did 3 or 4 years ago in the defensive backfield based on what Chris likes in a player. The height, I mean, it's obvious. You go look at what they had at Seattle in terms of the length of their defensive backs. That's obviously important to Chris. And certainly we focus on that even more now that Chris is in the building, not to mention the play demeanor and those type of things as well. But that's why it's so critical that the communication's at a high level with our scouting staff and our coaching staff.
Going back to balancing paying guys already on the roster and the draft picks, when you look at Russell Wilson's contract this week, what does that mean for y'all and Dak Prescott? Is there any more urgency to get a deal done before the market continues to reset?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Russell deserves to be paid at that level, in my opinion. He's won Super Bowls. He's has success year in and year out. His numbers are really good. He's a competitor. His teams win. As I said, he's wearing a Super Bowl ring. I mean, the guy deserves to be paid at the top of the market, and I don't think it was terms of, was it huge in terms of how much he beat the Rodgers? No, and so I don't feel any pressure to rush the situation. I mean, this is an important contract for Dak. It's an important contract for our organization. We have to get it right, and I feel like we'll do that.
Take one or two more on the draft. If anyone has anything else.
Where does tight end rank in what you guys need? Obviously, Witten being back.
Well, we like our tight ends. Obviously, Jason Witten's back, and felt like Blake Jarwin really grew last year. Dalton Schultz, Rico Gathers is still on the roster, so we feel good about, obviously, the veteran experience that Witten brings, but also the young guys and their development from last year. And, Steven mentioned it, we have a young football team. We had one of the youngest teams in the league last year. I thought we had a lot of young players who grew up over the course of 16 games. We got significantly better as a team, but I think a lot of individuals got better too. And I think at that position, that was important. There was a big hole last year when Witt left. We had a lot of young guys, and they had to grow up fast, and I think that happened over the course of the season. That's good for our team, and it's certainly great to have number 82 back.
Steven, in this draft, how much do you kind of look around the bend at like a position group at defensive tackle, project where that group's going to be, and maybe start filling future roles now?
Well, Mike, I think that's why you don't want to get into saying what you need more for this year than you do for the future. And I think when you just pick good football players, things work themselves out. And, if you start getting into just saying, boy, we need to put more focus or reach a little at one position, I think that's when when you make a bad pick. And I think if we just get in there and we set our board right and we make good decisions, as Jerry said, you never know what's coming at you till it gets there. And in terms of what's going to be there, what options are there in terms of a trade or a situation like that. I just think you have to be prepared, which I think we've done a great job of doing, get your board right, and then be prepared to make some good, quick decisions. And we've got good people in the room that do that.
Other thing that I would add to that is I think it's always imperative to keep enough of your resources that you can take advantage of a great opportunity. Like if it were cap room, flexibility in the cap, wherever you are, be ready to get an opportunity that comes your way, and be thinking, dreaming, whatever you want to, be dreaming about that opportunity. And so I'm really rewarded, if you will. I am rewarded by the fact that we have as much flexibility in this system, with the cap system the way that it is, with our draft system as competitive as it is, and it is competitive, we have, in the free agency system that we have, then we have always tried to keep that flexibility. Therein lies really the reason and the incentive behind a negotiation. Because a negotiation is an effort. It's the money. It's never about the money. It's really never about the money. You're going to spend the money in our system. It's about how you allocate, and do you allocate any of that for an opportunity? And that's just instincts there. That's just saving it for not a rainy day, but a brilliantly sunny day that you might get a chance to do something special.
Thank you. For those of us who are going over the presentation, you can head over there, follow Joe right now. We'll see you there in just a couple minutes.
Over here.